Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Midweek Blessing. This is a milestone for me tonight. We are going to finish the Gospel of John. It's not very often I finish projects that I start. I have a personality disorder, let's call it that, because it has not always served me well. But I'm a bit sanguine, a bit sort of ADD something, and I start more projects than I finish. So while there's a little bit of a sense of accomplishment, I'm actually more and more just looking forward to getting on with Revelation next, which is what preempted this whole thing to begin with. So I know tonight we have a whole chapter left in the Gospel of John, and we're going to do a whole chapter tonight. It's not a tremendously long chapter, a couple of stories in there. There's a lot to dig into if we wanted to, but we'll use our regular allotted time and we'll go through the last chapter of John. To be honest, the reason I'm doing all this in one sitting is number one, I want to finish John. Number two, Christmas is coming, and number three, I'd like to start Revelation in January, the beginning of the new year. Just seems too convenient a moment that we've come up to here as we finish John and begin Revelation. So I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks while things quietening down between Christmas and New Year and get this ready for the next chapter, the next season, I guess, of the Midweek Blessing here as we go into John. So if you've been here for the ride, I've been glad for your company. You have encouraged me along the way. The first one of these I uploaded to YouTube. I think I got about 4 views, and I'm like, well, this is good for me to do. So I'm going to keep doing it. But thanks for joining in and being part of this as we see what John, the last disciple, the last one to write a gospel, what it was that he wanted the followers of Jesus to know. Those that perhaps had not seen Jesus, people like you and me, we never got to meet Jesus walking the face of this earth. What is it that John wanted Christ's followers to know? And I've enjoyed going through the book here, and now we'll go to Revelation. But if you think we're going to start without a weather report, well, then you have you have something. I just realized I did not put the weather report up on my screen to see. So I'm gonna see if I can pull this up. Let's see if I can do this on the fly. You can't see what I'm doing. I really hope I'm flying through my what do we call it? File. No, I don't know where I put that. So I created it somewhere, but I don't know where it is. So the weather report was going to be snowy. We're just at the end of a snow session. People are telling me this is unusual. 3 days snow in a row is not really the South Dakota way. I was promised dry, flaky snow that you could go and clear your driveway with a blower. That's not what we had. In fact, last night, I just want to let me do this. This will show you a little bit. Last night, I went out walking with Cindy. We went down to the state capitol, where they show a lot of Christmas trees. That's Cindy looking particularly radiant in a very lovely, lovely picture. We went out to the Capitol. That's the Capitol building of South Dakota. And that's only about half a mile from where we lived. And inside at Christmas time, they I don't know how many trees, but it's a lot of trees that they that they have around there that are decorated by various organizations around the state, including our own church here in Pierre, South Dakota. So Cindy and I went and did that last night in the sort of calm between more and more snowstorms. I have been doing more shoveling than I've done in 20 years. It's not difficult. I didn't know shoveling for the last 20 years. So with that done and the weather report fully given, except to say that by this time next week, I'm expecting a day that has a high of -7 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of you in Europe, that's about -20 degrees Celsius. That's the high. So, got that to look forward to. Okay, I think I'm gonna need some scripture. So let's dive in and let's do this last chapter of John. If you're with me last week, it really felt like John had concluded. A number of Bible books do this. Sometimes we really think that people added some things on. In Deuteronomy, it describes at the very end Moses' death, and we say that Moses wrote Deuteronomy. So it seems like someone tagged something on. Paul seems to conclude in Romans 15, but there's Romans 16. He seems to one more thing, and that's happening here. So it seemed to wrap up nicely last week, but John's got one more story to tell, one more encounter with the resurrected Christ. So here we are in John chapter 21, last chapter of John, and we're going to begin at verse 1. Yes, we're going through the whole entire chapter. After Jesus had revealed himself to Thomas, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, which we know as the Sea of Galilee or Lake Gennesaret. It's got a few different names throughout the years. And it's a lake. It's not a big sea, but, I wouldn't want to swim across it. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. This is different. They are not locked in the room anymore, okay? It looks like they've actually left Jerusalem. They could only stay pent up, locked up for so long. I'm just thinking of all the snow outside. Yeah, it's only so long you can stay pent up. But they broken out of the city. The Passover was over. The crowds were dispersing. My guess is they used some of that to get away. And so they found themselves back in Galilee. Verse 2, Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, which we looked at last week, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and two others of his disciples. This is an eyewitness. John's just writing from his memory, and he's starting to be an old man here, and I'm guessing there's just two. There were a couple others. I don't remember which ones they were. He's like somebody being tested. Can you name all the 12 disciples? Well, James, Peter, John, Nathanael, Thomas, and some others. They were there together, there in Galilee. Now, Matthew has Jesus telling the disciples to go to a certain mountain in Galilee and wait for him there. And that's where we get Matthew 28 and the Great Commission from that spot right there. So there are while John is quite different, and John seems to remember differently to some other people from time to time, there is confirmation from other Gospels that, yes, these disciples were also in Galilee. Verse 3, Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And if you've been through some trauma, some heartache, some life-changing experience, and you, for want of a better word, wallow in it for a while, there comes a time when you're like, okay, enough of this. Let's go do something. What does Peter do? He does what he's familiar with. He says, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, all right, we're going to go with you. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. It's really hard to go back. In fact, Jesus says in Luke chapter 9, he's like, in fact, I've got it written here, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service. If you start following Jesus and then go, well, I think I'm going to go back and do this. When you've done back that for a while and your life hasn't worked, I'm going to come back for Jesus. Like, You've got to be committed to this. Lot's wife in Genesis, looking back, was terminal for her. And the disciples are going back here. Now we're going to see that while they're not supposed to, and while we're supposed to keep moving forward, keep following Jesus Christ, when we do slip up or revert back, Jesus is there waiting for us and is inviting us back. It's a beautiful picture of this here. But they went out fishing and they didn't catch anything. They went out all night and there just wasn't anything there. Verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, that's, by the way, a really good translation. When I was studying this in everybody was like, it's more like children. Most versions don't translate it children. It's like, hey, guys, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. This is an emphatic no. This is the strongest no in the Greek language. We tend to use phrases when we're like, oh my goodness, no. Or you've got to be kidding. Like, oh, do you see any? We start using other terms to emphasize the no. The Greek language has some strong emphasis in no. And Romans 5 or Romans 6, where Paul has described grace, and people answer Paul's description of grace by saying, well, then if we're going to be forgiven more, depending on how much we've been sinned, well, let's sin more so that we can receive more forgiveness. And Paul gives this like, no, that's not what he's trying to say. And Jesus calls out, they don't know it's Jesus. We'll touch on, just let that hang there for a while. Do you have any fish? Do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. Now, in a similar story, at the beginning of his ministry, when Jesus is calling his disciples, he just sort of lets them cast the net out and wait and see. But here he's like, no, put the net on the other side, and you'll find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity. Because of the quantity of the fish. Sorry, I was trying to put another verse up there. Verse 7. The disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now, they didn't recognize Jesus. It seems to be something's going on. The bond and the relationship that Jesus had with his disciples before his crucifixion has taken a hit. And they didn't know it was Jesus. But when they put the nets on the other side, which, by the way, was an instruction they followed, not knowing it was Jesus. I don't follow that part of the story exactly. But then they get all of these fish. And the disciples whom Jesus loved, the one who beat Peter to the grave, said to Peter, it's the Lord. This is the youngest disciple trying to help out the lead disciple. It's him. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, maybe Simon Peter's eyes were older and they didn't have glasses back then. I just thought about that, mostly because I couldn't see the writing that I have in front of me. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment. Most people, when they're about to jump in the water, take clothes off, but Peter's going to go see Jesus. Maybe he has no intention of going back to the boat, so he better take his clothes with him. He took off his outer garment and threw himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish. They were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. That's some people putting some measurements in there for us so that we can understand. Verse 9, when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it. And bread. Maybe there were 5 loaves and 2 fish. fish and bread. Jesus provides. They'd been out all night and got nothing. Jesus comes, says, put your net on the other side. They get a bunch of fish, 153, we're about to find out. Because, sometimes you just got to count to know and get an idea and measure somehow what's going on. But Jesus already has fish and bread being prepared for their breakfast. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. He's going to add to it. He's going to let what the disciples participated in and brought to the table, and he's going to include that. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. Now, a lot of people try and make something out of that number. You'll see as we go through Revelation that those details aren't where my head generally lands. It's a lot. It tells us that there's an eyewitness there. John's there. He's counting them. There are details that he remembers. He may not remember all of the disciples who were there, but he remembers that there were 153. It probably stunned him. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Let's flip on to the next one, verse 12. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. But there's some weird feelings amongst this group. As I was considering this earlier today, it's like when you've been dating someone for a while and you've broken up. Maybe one moved away and one stayed. And you promised each other that you were going to, keep this relationship going, but you drifted apart while you were living in different states and maybe ended up meeting different people. And you come back home and you meet up. And there was a time when you were tight and you knew could finish each other's sentences. You were just bound together. And now that's not the case, and it's awkward. You know it shouldn't be, but it's awkward. And Jesus and the disciples, all these stories after the resurrection, it starts off, he's alive, and they run down to the tomb, but every interaction they have it's not the same as it was before. Something has changed, and I don't know if John even knows exactly what has changed, even though John seems to be the more perceptive one amongst the group. At least that's how he remembers it, and he's sharing the details that he remembered. Verse 13, Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now, earlier, a few weeks ago, this will check your memories a little bit. When Peter was about to deny Jesus, the Gospel of John makes note that that there was a charcoal fire where Peter and John were. And that type of fire has a very distinctive smell. And this was a charcoal fire here now too. It just said that a couple verses ago. Smell can be associated with memory. Jesus is trying his best to bring these moments back because Jesus is about to restore Peter. In fact, we're going to go to verse 15 now, where that story starts. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. He's going back to his old name. The women were told to go and tell the disciples and Peter. Now Jesus is calling him Simon. Ever since the denial, we haven't heard a word out of Peter's mouth. Which, if you know Peter from the gospel story, that was not Peter. Maybe he doesn't know where he stands here. Maybe he's riddled with guilt. which will also make this dynamic, this interaction awkward. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, there's some wordplay going on here, and I'm just going to assume that you know that there are various words for love in the Greek language. Agape is the one that we're most familiar with. That's the godly, rich, I just love you because you're you. And that's the word being used here. For God so loved the world. This was agape love. When John describes the disciple who Jesus loved, that was philos love, philos love. That was the brotherly love. That was this, hey, we're buddies. We're close. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. Now, I always imagined that Jesus and Peter were off somewhere, and in a minute they're going to turn around and see that John is there following them. So that happened, but this looks like it also started in front of people. This was a public restoration. Peter was going to lead this group of men, and he was going to need to have people know that he was restored. Verse 16, he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me, agape? He said to him, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Let's go on to the next verse, verse 17. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? But this time, Jesus uses the philos word for love. Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time. Maybe Peter forgot about the 3 denials. Grieved because he said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You can keep asking me, but you know how I feel about you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Peter is back in. Peter is restored. But he goes on, truly, truly, I say, did I skip one there? Nope, we're all good. Just checking. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walked wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This, he said, to show by what kind of death he was going to glorify God. Now, this is crucifixion language. That may not be obvious to us right away, but that's fairly obvious to those that would have been reading this at the time. Stretch out your hands. To dress would be to be attached to the cross by nails, rope, whatever instrument they chose to use. And after saying this, Jesus said to Peter, follow me. You see, when Jesus said he was going to die, and Peter goes, we'll die with you. And Jesus says, no, you'll deny me 3 times before the cock crows twice, which Peter did. Jesus is now saying, yeah, you are going to die for me. And you are going to live up to your promise there. This is going to happen. And we know now that Peter was crucified. We don't have this from Scripture, but we have it from tradition, and that was that Peter's wife was also crucified at the same time as Peter. I don't know if that's legend that just sort of made it through the years or if that came from something. But apparently Peter had to watch his wife be crucified for Christ's sake before he was crucified, where he said, "Put me upside down, for I'm not worthy to die the death that my Lord died." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. The one also who had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" This is, I think, pretty sure John talking about himself in the best way he knows how to. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Now, there's some things going on here. Maybe there's even a little rivalry between Peter and John. Peter's the oldest disciple. John is the youngest. John has something the other disciples don't seem to have. Remember, it was John who could get into the high priest's courtyard. He had some connections. It was John who had a very special bond relationship with Jesus. But sometimes the closest people to the leader aren't the ones that have to do the really tough leadership work. Those are sometimes different kind of roles. And Peter saw John, and maybe after what he'd done, maybe he saw John as being the next leader. Remember, it was John that saw that it was Jesus on the lakeshore there, and Peter only went when John's like, it's the Lord. John just seems to be one step ahead here. Maybe Peter was thinking, you know what? I think John might need to be leader. We have stories from church tradition that Peter's churches and John's churches didn't always get along. There was even some tension there. So Peter's like, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man right here?" Verse 22, Jesus said to him, "If it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You, Peter, I'm talking to you right now. You follow me." So the saying spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? That's how rumors get started. Let me turn that one off. There we go. Verse 24. This is the disciple who's bearing witness about these things. It's John, the author of this gospel we've gone through, and who has written these things. And we know that his testimony is true. Now, there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. You know, probably John in his older age had a secretary, someone who wrote this down. John would have dictated it, like Paul would have dictated to many of his letters. Then at the end, he'd put in his own hand. In fact, it even says in some of his letters, "And here I am," Paul says, "in my own hand," saying. And it seemed maybe John did the same thing here. And he's like repeating this sort of conclusion that we got at the last chapter. Now, there are many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Boy, if John could see the world today and the amount of books and information we have and the speed we move around this place, I don't think he could have comprehended it there, even though he maybe tried. And even though he saw Revelation, I still think he'd been pretty stunned to actually see this as we know it today and live in it today. John's signing off. He wants Christ's followers to know who Jesus is, that Jesus is God. Jesus calls you to follow him. There are some highlights in this book where John finds ways to say who Jesus is, the I am statements that we went through a long time ago. Chapter 12 for me was very distinctive, where it says that a lot of religious leaders traded the glory of God for the glory of man. And here, Peter, this tiny little band of disciples here, are people who have found their way to choosing the glory of God over the glory of man. God is the real thing, and we get to follow him. This isn't the only message we have. We have the other gospels as well, which are equally rich in their own ways. And we will, in January, on Wednesday, January 4, begin our journey through Revelation, the message to the churches. God's people gathering, witnessing, surviving, living through some tough times until Jesus comes back and claims his people and takes them home with him. Meantime, thank you so much for joining me through here. I do have a sense of climax and accomplishment and finality here as we wrap this up. And I do thank you for your attention, companionship along the way, the little notes and texts, and when you come on and share and say that you've been here. I do certainly appreciate that and enjoy that a lot. And I praise God that I have a life and a role where I can keep doing this. And I will finish off by saying, have a Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. And may we all get to know our Jesus and our Christ better in the year that is to come. Right now, for our blessing, I'm just going to switch a little bit and nod my head to the time of the year. And well, I didn't just go down and see all those beautiful Christmas trees in the state capitol and just keep the camera in my pocket. It was incredibly beautiful in a very cold and bitter world outside. It was incredibly warm and stunningly beautiful inside. And so I'm just going to sign off tonight with a blessing and a reminder of the beautiful things of life, and pick this up again when we come together next year in January. Thank you again for your company. Did I say that yet? I mean it. And we'll see you in a little bit. And right now, I am just looking for the right file to play, which I have now found. So good night. It's cold and snowy, and we just saw a lot of Christmas trees.
And the bells are ringing.
And now the bells are ringing.
And it was beautiful.
Merry Christmas! Wonder if the phone can hear him. All you can hear is probably wind on the microphone.